What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Dbacks option some players out of camp, but will it be the last time we see them this season? And looking at the latest Dbacks projected opening day roster brought to you by MLB.com.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. On today's show, we got a whole bunch to talk to you guys about the option players out of the Dbacks camp who we think could be coming back this season, talking about the next wave of Dbacks outfield crop looking nice, and the latest Dbacks projected opening day roster brought to you by Steve Gilbert of MLB.com. So a whole bunch I want to talk to you guys about today. First, I want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss some Dbacks players that were optioned out of camp, because there was a whole bunch of guys that unfortunately got the call that they were either being reassigned to minor league camp or they were being optioned to AAA Reno Aces. And for me, there was really just three players that I want to discuss, because all the players that got reassigned to minor league camp, I don't really have many thoughts on for you on today's show. The guys that I really want to discuss are the three players that were sent back to AAA camp because I believe, or sent back to AAA because I believe those three guys could have an impact with the Dbacks at some point this season. The first guy I want to discuss is Gilbert Diaz, who was sent back to AAA. This is now with the Dbacks updated top 30 prospect ranking list on MLB.com. Gilbert Diaz is now the Dbacks top ranked pitching prospect, someone that we saw last year for Arizona have himself a pretty solid season in his small sample size. It wasn't even that tiny of a sample size because the Dbacks were dealing with so many injuries. They actually needed Diaz, but 7 games, 4 starts, 20 innings pitched, like a good sample size from Diaz. He was a 3.81 ERA. Did he give up too many hits? Probably. Was the walk rate great? No. Strikeout rate? No. But for the most part, he was solid in terms of not giving up a lot of loud, hard contact, getting the D-backs through those starts and looking fine. Like, he didn't go out there and, like, crap the bed, have blow-up starts. Like, he had one start against the Kansas City Royals where he gave up 7 earned runs in 3 innings pitched. And outside of that, Gilbert Diaz was very good when looking at his starting log for the Arizona Diamondbacks. So it was really just one blow-up outing. And outside of that, if you took his one outing away from the Kansas City Royals, he only gave up 5 earned runs the whole season in 25 innings pitched. So it was a very nice year for Diaz, someone that could throw in the upper 90s with that fastball, can touch 99, someone that has that nasty slider as well that could work off of it. Gilbert Diaz, I think, is someone that we will see again on the major league level this year. The thing with Diaz, because his stuff and arsenal is so good, D-backs first want to give him reps and opportunities as a starter. That's why he's going back to AAA, so he could go be in that rotation and continue to develop as a starter. Diaz is still so young as well, 24 years of age, and if there's injuries to the rotation, I think Diaz is going to be one of the first guys called up to make a spot start for the D-backs. If there's injuries in the bullpen, D-backs can use Gilbert Diaz as a high-velocity, maybe mid-leverage reliever for Arizona. Like, there's a lot of different ways to use Diaz as a spot starter, as a reliever who could throw hard. So maybe he's not exactly ready right now to be a everyday contributor for the D-backs. But I think at some point in 2025, we will see Diaz back up on the major league level, making an impact for the D-backs. So just because he's getting assigned to AAA right now doesn't mean we won't see him again later down the line. Same with this next pitcher, Christian Mena. I believe Diaz is higher on the list of guys who get called up first because I think Diaz is a little bit more established, a little bit more along in his development. I think his fastball slider combination with that knuckle curve, it's just a little bit more major league ready right now than what Christian Mena has, because Mena, he's still super talented. The thing about Mena, youngest guy in AAA with at least 90 innings pitched last season. So this is a guy that's still super raw. He's adding velocity on his fastball, adding velocity on his sinker. Biggest thing that he needs to do is add a little bit of movement. Kind of flat on his fastball last year. Not really, it wasn't really major league ready, but he was still a guy that we thought was good enough to at least have a spot start in the majors last year, despite probably not being fully major league ready, still being 22 years of age. I think trading Dominic Fletcher at the peak of his powers when he had that small sample size with Arizona, I think trading him for Christian Mena is going to end up being a monster of a steal for the D-backs. Will Mena end up being like a number 2 or number 3 starter? Maybe, maybe not. But I think Mena at least has potential to be a back-end starter, a very good reliever. Like, I think Mena has real major league potential and talent as a pitcher if he continues to develop. Dominic Fletcher, I like him, but guys who are 5'6", unless you're a Jose Altuve, those guys typically don't turn into like 10-year veterans, right? Superstar players. Maybe Dominic Fletcher is the outlier exception, but like that's how good you usually have to be at that size and stature. You have to be an outlier. I'd much rather bet on the dude who's the youngest pitcher going in AAA in Christian Mena. So I do think Diaz is first in terms of who gets the opportunity if there's injury, but I do think Mena is talented enough. He's got the stuff. He just needs to continue to work on his development. But I do think Mena could get another crack, another opportunity as a spot starter or as a reliever at some point this year. Then the final guy I want to discuss, Tim Tawa. He is 25 years old. He is also ranked 25th in D-backs organization. Christian Mena was ranked 13th. And Tawa is coming off a fantastic year in the minor leagues, 868 OPS in 2024. 31 home runs. And the big question is, can he get an opportunity if there's injuries to one of the DHs, if like the D-backs utility guy gets hurt at some point? Like, will Tim Tawa be one of the first guys that get called up as that backup infielder, potentially backup outfielder, who shows he has some pop? If there's a guy like Randall Grichuk, if he goes down, like a Lourdes Gurriel goes down, or whoever the backup utility guy, if they go down, could we see Tim Tawa step up to the plate as a guy with defensive versatility and some pop in his bat? Potentially. I do think this is the year to finally see Tim Tawa on the major league level, like we saw Jorge Barrosa last year on the major league level. Like, it was just his time to at least get a shot. And we talked about Barrosa a lot last spring training, last offseason. Could he be a guy that's like intriguing to watch entering the regular season? He did get a little bit of opportunity, but we knew the D-backs outfield was too loaded for him to get a real chance. Tim Tawa, I don't think there's going to be a real opportunity unless there's an injury. But even with that being said, I still don't think he's going to have a large sample size at any point this season. It'll probably be that Jorge Barrosa, get you a cup of coffee, get a few games under your belt just to see what you got, and then send you back down to the minor leagues. But if you can have 2 to 3 weeks of really good baseball, maybe you could trade him at his height like we did with a Dominic Fletcher. So Tim Tawa, I do expect to see at some point this year, but I wouldn't expect a large sample size or months of playing from Tim Tawa. Would probably be more along the lines of what Jorge Barrosa gave us last season. But I don't think this is the end of Gilbert Diaz, Christian Mena, Tim Tawa. I think they will all reappear at some point for the D-backs in 2025. Now we'll talk about the D-backs outfield crop looking nice. The next wave of D-backs prospects, we'll discuss that in segment number 2. But hey, if you're looking to place a little wagers down on a March Madness game, then the best place to do that is going to be FanDuel, because March Madness is here and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. When I see the Phoenix Suns are playing, I'll take KD over on points. I'll take Booker over on points, and then give me the opponent's money line. I'm sorry, Suns fans, but that's what you got to do if you want to win some money. If you want to win some money, up to $200 in bonus bets, just put down $5. And if your bet wins, you get all that money in your pocket. So visit fanduel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right. Back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss the Dbacks outfield crop of prospects, the next wave of guys, because just looking at camp and some of the numbers from spring training and like the D-backs prospect list, I just really like where the D-backs are organizationally from a depth perspective, from the major league level down to the minors when it comes to the options of outfielders that the D-backs have, because we of course know their outfield is probably their strength right now on their team, at least defensively. I mean, if you have Carroll, Gurriel, McCarthy, and Alec Thomas, you're going to be in the conversation for best defensive outfield in Major League Baseball. And then after that, I mean, you still got Randall Grichuk on the Major League roster too. He's got outfield experience. Like, that's a lot of quality talent on the Major League level. But even when you look past the guys on the Major League level, I think this next wave of guys that could be coming up over the next couple of years, even guys that could make an impact at some point this season, I really like this next wave of dudes for the D-backs. And of course, we all know about Druw Jones. Yes, he's been a little bit disappointing, mostly due to injuries, but this is a guy that still ranks 7th in the D-backs organization. Still someone in 109 games in 2024. He had an 814 OPS. Like, this is a guy that still has a ton of talent, probably the best base runner currently in the D-backs organization. I still think he's a tantalizing guy with raw power, with elite defense. Like, currently, he can come play in the majors, I think, as a defensive outfielder and as a speedster, because he still has those two strengths. We need to see him be more consistent from the power standpoint, cut back on strikeouts. But I still think Druw Jones has the talent within him, and he's not the only one. There's so many guys right now on this D-backs team that I really like. I mean, their number 3 prospect is Slade Caldwell. Haven't really seen him too much, but he's someone that's really tantalizing and highly touted. But someone that's also in the mix for the D-backs at camp this spring training, Ryan Waldschmidt, who we've seen make some highlight plays. If you're on D-backs Twitter this week, he's had some monster home runs this week. He's had some home runs be robbed. And he's someone, when you look at him, a guy that was a 3rd rounder a couple years ago, his numbers in the NCAA when he played in college, absolutely insane. And so far in 2024, his first season of the majors wasn't too bad. 273 average, 803 OPS. He is someone that I would watch over the next couple of years as a rising star in this D-backs organization as an outfield prospect. I think Ryan Waldschmidt has major leaguer written all over him. It just depends what level of major leaguer does he have. And then even guys who are on the fringe, right? Waldschmidt and Druw Jones are like the highly touted, high potential prospects, but like Jorge Barrosa, who we've discussed already, he can still at least come in and probably be a contributor with his defense, with his speed, so his decent contact ability. I know he wasn't great on the major league level last year, but he's still someone that has really done well in the minors. Last season was his best year, but 2023, he was still good. And he's still someone that could potentially be used as a trade chip. There's still teams out there that are going to need depth in their outfield, teams that see injuries, and the fact that the D-backs have produced so many quality outfielders over the last few years. Other teams might be intrigued by Jorge Barrosa because they know the D-backs are a factory when it comes to producing outfielders. Now, Barrosa, another guy who is only 5'6", and so, like we said with Dominic Fletcher, that probably doesn't make you feel too good considering that's a very small stature. But still, I think Barrosa has enough tools within his bag to at least be a contributor on the major league level. I just don't know what level that is, but still, Barrosa is still someone that is very intriguing and still someone as like an organizational depth piece you're not mad at. AJ Vukovic, this is someone that we've discussed on the podcast over the last couple weeks as another dude who is like major league ready. If the D-backs want to give him a chance on the major league level, like now would probably be the time. He's like 24, 25 years of age. And he's someone that I think is very intriguing because he's like one of those athletic freaks of nature. This was a guy, high school basketball phenom, along with being a really good baseball player as well. And so I love those two sport athletes because I think those are the best kind of like overall players. And AJ Vukovic is someone that is slowly adding more power to his profile. He's always had power, but trying to round out his offensive game, cut back on the strikeouts. He's also someone that has played a little bit more in the outfield as well, but can also play a little bit in the infield if he really needs to. Athletic, like I just like AJ a lot, and I think because of that raw power he possesses, again, that the D-backs needed because of injury, just someone to go in there and play DH and maybe provide a little bit of spark to that offense via the power. I think AJ Vukovic could be that guy at some point for the D-backs this season. And so he is someone that I just want to keep on the D-backs radar. Barossa and AJ are two guys that could maybe make an impact this year. Ryan Waldschmidt and Druw Jones are two guys over the next couple years to watch out for. And then one under the radar sneaky guy who's not on the top 30 D-backs prospect list, but in 9 at-bats for the D-backs this spring training, has 4 hits, a home run, and just has looked solid. And if you go and look at his minor league numbers as well, they also look pretty good. I'm talking about Jack Hurley. This was a guy who was a 3rd-round pick by the D-backs a couple years ago. I think I originally said Ryan Waldschmidt was a 3rd-round pick by the D-backs. Let me double-check that because he might have not picked. I think I was thinking about our good friend Jack Hurley when I said Ryan Waldschmidt was the D-backs 3rd rounder. If I said that, that's not true. I can't figure out right now where Ryan Waldschmidt was drafting as I'm doing this podcast. So sorry about that. But Jack Hurley was a guy who a couple years ago was drafted in the 3rd round by the D-backs. And so far, he's a guy that really crushed on the NCAA level. When you look at his numbers at Virginia Tech in 2023, look at his numbers at Virginia Tech in 2022, monster numbers. And so if that guy can translate that on the major league level, what he did in college, because so far his season last year in high A, not too bad. I mean, 12 home runs in 117 games. He had a 709 OPS, but it was not a bad year last season in high A for Jack Hurley. And considering he's having a good spring training and a small sample size right now, as a little bit of pedigree, as a 3rd-round pick a couple years ago, Jack Hurley, just someone as like an under-the-radar outfield prospect for the D-backs who's currently not listed as a top 30 guy. I would just keep him on my radar as a guy to watch his upcoming minor league season for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now we'll discuss the D-backs projected opening day roster, brought to you by MLB.com in segment number 3. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offers one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage up to $5 million, no medical exam required, and it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedon. Go to selectquote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedon. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. Back here on the Locked on Dimebacks podcast. And now let's look at the D-backs projected opening day roster brought to you by Steve Gilbert, beat writer for MLB.com, covering the Arizona Diamondbacks. He's boots on the ground. He's got his projected roster for the D-backs as we're about halfway through spring training. And so let's go through the biggest surprises and takeaways from the projected roster, because some things are just chalk when looking at this. First thing to notice, catcher, Gabriel Moreno, of course, but then Jose Herrera, which we discussed on a podcast recently, I think on yesterday's podcast, when we went through our latest update on spring training battles. We said Jose Herrera was probably going to win the job as backup catcher because he's out of options, so it's much easier to start ADC and AAA, start Herrera on the major league level, and then if Herrera really struggles defensively, provides you no sort of offense, whatever, then you could go to ADC or go in another direction. But I think for the time being, Jose will win the backup job for the D-backs. Josh Naylor, of course, first base. Ketel, second. Perdomo, short. Third, Eugenio. No surprise there. Outfield, Corbin Carroll, Lourdes Gurriel, Jake McCarthy. And then, of course, or maybe not then, of course, but Alek Thomas also listed as an outfielder. I think that's a surprise. I think we're all expecting Thomas as a bench player, backup outfielder for the D-backs. But again, as I keep saying with Alek Thomas, I'm going to be consistent. If Thomas does not hit, this is a big make or break season for me as an Alek Thomas guy. I'm sure the D-backs are going to give him as many opportunities until he's out of options. But if he does not hit for Arizona, I know how good he is defensively, but McCarthy, Carroll, and Lourdes Gurriel can still be the best defensive trio in Major League Baseball. Randall Grichuk's a solid defensive outfielder too. Like Thomas, I need more from the bat. If he does not provide it for me, I would much rather look in another direction for the D-backs, just because I just don't know if his defense is worth enough, if his bat is really going to struggle. But still, as a bench piece, he's not fine. It really comes down to like how much playing time he's going to get. Are we going to see Jake McCarthy lose playing time again to Alek Thomas just because of that defense, or you're just going to finally realize, hey, Jake McCarthy can't hit and he could play defense? Something that's two things Alek Thomas can't do. He can do one of those two things. He could play defense, but he can't hit and play defense. Jake McCarthy can do both, and so he should get a lot of the playing time over Thomas, and I hope Torey Lovullo does that in 2025. Moving through the roster, Pavin Smith, Randall Grichuk, the two DHs, not a surprise there. The first big surprise, the bench utility guy. Steve Gilbert has the guy. If you listen to yesterday's podcast, because, of course, I'm a guy who's pretty tapped in myself, he has Garrett Hampson as the projected guy to win the utility role, and that's who I said as well. I said we all wanted Jordan Lawler to win it. I said Torey Lovullo's comments made it seem like Lawler had a chance, but at the end of the day, feels like Lawler is going to start the year in AAA to give him as many opportunities in reps as possible as an everyday starting third baseman, shortstop, whatever. We felt like Vargas, he's had a great spring, but we probably know what he is. Greg Kessinger feels the most like Kevin Newman, but what's his offensive upside? I made the case for Garrett Hampson yesterday because of the speed he has, which is a real weapon, the defensive versatility to play in the infield and outfield, and the fact he's been around the block in the NL West, coming from the Colorado Rockies, knows the competition really well. Not a surprise to see Steve Gilbert put Garrett Hampson down as the guy who's going to win the job, because that's who I thought in my projections yesterday. Garrett Hampson, he would be my pick. He's having a good spring training. I think he brings a lot to the plate, so I like Garrett Hampson as the utility guy for the D-backs. Rotation, Burns, Gallen, Kelly, Erod, and Fott. That's what we said should be the five in the rotation on yesterday's podcast. As I've been saying all offseason, I would love for the D-backs to trade Monty and Erod. But I'm starting to come around on the idea of keeping Erod. I mean, I think we're going to have to keep Erod, but I'm at least coming around to the idea that Erod is going to be fine and have a bounce back year for the D-backs. Monty, I'm on the other side. He is done in Arizona. I think he's over the hill, past his prime, whatever you want to say. Monty is cooked. Meanwhile, I think Erod is the guy who has a chance for a bounce back. So I do like that D-backs five-man rotation. And then the bullpen for Arizona. This is also huge because, of course, with all those starters, are they all going to go in the bullpen? Because we got Puck, Martinez, Ginkel, Mantiply, Ryan Thompson locked in as the five, which is the same that I said yesterday. And then I also said you can't lock him in, but you can write him down in pencil, Kendall Graveman. Well, Steve Gilbert also has Kendall Graveman written down. And so after that, I said it came down to two guys, for me at least personally, because I said we had to get Jordan Montgomery off the roster. He cannot be in the D-backs bullpen. He is not good enough. But if we go into the regular season with Jordan Montgomery, he will more than likely be in the D-backs pen, because that's where Steve Gilbert has Monty right now, in the D-backs pen. But as you guys know, in my version of the D-backs pen on yesterday's podcast, I did not have Monty there. I had the last two spots, or I had the last spot in the pen actually coming down to Drey Jameson versus Bryce Jarvis, because where Steve Gilbert has Jordan Montgomery in the pen, that's where I put Ryan Nelson, because when looking at Steve Gilbert's pen, he has Jordan Montgomery in and he has Drey Jameson in. And that's kind of like the same vibe as mine, because I had Drey Jameson in and I had Ryan Nelson in instead of Jordan Montgomery, because Ryan Nelson is clearly better than Monty, but because Monty's getting that big contract and there's really no place to put him, he will probably be in the bullpen. And Drey Jameson just so electric and his stuff is so nasty. I think it makes sense why he's in the pen as well. That's where I had Drey Jameson in my projections on yesterday's podcast. I also had him in the pen. Bryce Jarvis is still someone I like. He's like the first one on the outside looking in for me in this D-backs bullpen. If anyone goes down, if Drey gets hurt, if, one of the long relievers like a Kendall Graveman gets hurt, I think Bryce Jarvis should be like one of the first guys off the scrap heap to come in and help out this D-back squad. So looking at the D-backs opening day roster projection, not too many big takeaways or surprises. The biggest ones are probably Jordan Montgomery going into the bullpen and Garrett Hampson winning the backup utility role. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news, coverage, and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Deuces.